Hi there and welcome to another episode of Coping with COVID. We are talking to a whole bunch of people, and today we have someone quite different on our radar. I'm going to be talking to a community service psychologist named Daniella Renzon. Daniella is a writer as well. She's recently been published in Your Family magazine. And so I read the article and I thought that she'd be great to chat to because she brings a level of experience that I don't bring to conversations about things like coping skills and resilience. I trained as a coach and as a development coach specifically. So I use a lot of what happens in the psychological field to speak to my clients, but I then get to a point where often I need to refer them to people like to Daniella to really be able to deal with stuff that perhaps is where real resilience is needed from a psychological perspective. So today we're going to get a little bit more serious, and today Daniella is going to be able to take us to a bit of a deeper place about how to deal with resilience and coping skills. So Daniella, thank you so much for being online, and we're recording on a Sunday, so giving up your weekend for me. So thank you very much for being here. I really do appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's lovely to be here with you.
Cool. So let's get on to, you're a mom with teenagers. Hence, you wrote an article in Your Family about mental health and teenagers specifically. But we're not going to talk about teenagers necessarily. But tell me a bit about what your lockdown experience has been as a mom, as a wife with teenagers, and what's it been like for you?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I think for all of us, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, and we've gone through different phases. I was thinking about that. And I think my experience is probably a bit different to a lot of people's experience because I've had to go to work every day. So that's brought up a whole lot of stuff as well, especially in the beginning. Knowing that COVID is out there, I'm working in the public sector, brought up quite a lot of anxiety and fears. And I think that that's normal. That's something I wanted to speak about, actually, which maybe I should jump straight into.
Well, before you jump straight into that, and I'm glad we're going to talk about anxiety and stuff like that, and jump straight into it. Because I'll tell you one of the reasons why I'm talking to you as well is I got a mail from someone who watched the first couple of videos and said, while she found it was so nice to talk about, positivity and we need to be resilient and that, she said, you need to talk to someone like me who I've just been told that I've been laid off. COVID has closed our company. We have no direction as to when retrenchment payments will be paid out. They're also saying to us there's a possibility of no work, no pay. So we don't know if we're going to get salaries. I haven't slept for 3 nights. Alcohol is opening up, but by the time people watch this, we will have had liquor stores opened again. She's planning on drinking herself into a stupor because she doesn't know how else to deal with this. And that's why I want to talk to you about this, because those are the kind of people that we're looking at. They're people who are really struggling with not just kind of uncertainty about when will I be able to stop working from home, but what am I going to do with this, with what's being thrown at me?
Yeah, I think there's so many layers to what's happening for everybody at the moment. So while there are mental health issues that are really going to come up, I've been thinking mental health is actually going to be the new pandemic alongside COVID. But the reality is for many people, it's not just about feeling anxious and feeling depressed. It's about real survival concerns. So many people have lost an income. We just don't know what the future is going to look like. How are we going to survive? So it's a very difficult time for people.
As a psychologist, what do you say to someone like that? Do you say, oh, it'll be okay? Because one of the things that you talk about in the article is that people must feel their feelings. And I know one of the things that I hate is when someone says to me, when I say, oh, I'm feeling so sad, and they're like, oh, don't be sad. And you're like, okay. So,
fine, I'll be happy.
Yeah, thanks for that. What do you say to someone who is you know, I've described it before with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They're at the
Yeah.
bottom now. They don't know what the hell they're going to do.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is really true. Like, it really isn't helpful for people to try reassure us and say everything's going to be okay, it's going to work out, you'll feel better,
Yeah.
you know, don't be sad. It's not helpful, actually. I think what's more helpful is to sit with a person in that fear, in that trauma that they're going through, in that terribly sad, painful place, because we can't really activate out of that until we've processed what we're going through. So to constantly deny it or have people around us deny it isn't helpful, actually. So I know your theme of the series is about building resilience, which is beautiful and it's so needed at the moment. And when I think about resilience, I was trying to reflect on that over this period for me. I think the word that keeps coming to mind is adaptability as well. We have to find a way to adapt to the situation, but we can't adapt if we first are still resisting the situation, if we don't accept it. You know, the more we resist something, the more it's going to resist back and the more power it's going to keep having. And we don't want to accept the situation. It's unfathomable. It's horrific. It's shocking. For some people, it's really, really life-threatening. And I don't just mean illness-wise, but like with livelihood. But somehow to try, we almost have to, because we're so out of control of so many things at the moment, which evokes so much for us. We almost have to almost mentally clear like two columns. What am I absolutely not in control of at the moment? And there are so many things. We can't control COVID. We can't control whether we get it or not, other than taking precautions. We don't know how it might affect us if we get it, you know, how it might affect people we love. Maybe we can't control whether we stay employed, what's happening in the economy, that kind of thing. And what is helpful is to try and accept, well, this is the worst situation, but it just is. I wish it wasn't like this, but it is like this. And then to kind of move and think, okay, so what can I control? What are even if they're little things in my day, what can I do to give me a sense of agency in my world? And that can be quite empowering and can help us activate a bit if we feel, okay, we do have some control in our world. Yeah, so I think that's helpful.
What kind of things would you advise us to look at in terms of controlling? Because I know for some people, when I've used it, I've spoken about it before, where a therapist gave me, I drew a line down a piece of paper, and on the left-hand side, I wrote down what I couldn't control, which seemed quite macro. And then what I could control was actually, it was so micro. It was as granular as whether I would have Rice Krispies versus cornflakes.
Yeah.
Is that your recommendation as well?
Was it helpful?
It was incredibly helpful. And it's one of the things I've done in lockdown as well is, so I'll be very honest here. And I haven't said this in the videos before, but I suffer from depression. And so one of the things Daniella will know is I canceled yesterday's interview because I just was completely flat. And I have also got to a point where in my career at the moment, I had a very big contract. And because of COVID, my contract has been completely and utterly, it's been canceled. I've been given notice. So in terms of financially, I have obviously concerns and I need to find new ways of doing things. So what that meant is that in lockdown, I literally had to sit down, and what happened was I wrote down what I couldn't control, and I can't control the fact that the company I was working for are closing down. I couldn't control the fact that I couldn't go for interviews anywhere because no one was advertising. I couldn't, people don't have money for coaching. I'm sure you're finding that in the psychological field is that people are not spending money on, they're holding on to. So all of those things I can't control. And then I sat down and I looked at what I could control. And they were things like what time I woke up in the morning.
Yes.
Deciding to put on jeans as opposed to staying in my pajamas. Deciding to, you know, exercise in the 6 to 9 period that we got. And those were, and deciding to speak to people. I made very kind of practical decisions to control, and it was incredibly helpful. It didn't take away what you were saying. It wasn't that I'm not suddenly like, oh, it'll be fine. You know, I don't need an ink. The reality is I still am sitting going, what the hell is I going to do in this situation? But I didn't get to the place of complete despair. I felt like there was something that I could do, and that's what I held on to. Sharon Sandberg writes about leaning in the situations, what it reminded me of when you were talking about acceptance and adaptability. And it's almost like I just had to, instead of just escaping into a bottle of wine, instead of escaping into a drug or whatever, you know, or going onto social media rampages, I just decided to lean into the situation by acknowledging this is what I couldn't control and leaning into what I could control. Is that what your advice? Have I been doing it right?
I feel like you've answered the question so perfectly and so beautifully. Okay. And what you also had to do, it sounds like, is dig quite deep to find a lot of internal resources and strength, not to spiral down into the despair that can call to us so much during this period.
Yeah.
And
so I just want to ask you something there is because one of the things you talk about in the article on mental health is that people must feel their feelings. So it almost for me could be slightly contradictory, because here I'm saying, look at what I can control, but you're also saying to me, I need to feel those feelings of despair, etc. Tell me what you mean by that.
That's quite a tricky question you're asking me. When we don't feel our feelings, when our feelings are really too painful or too terrifying, actually, and maybe we feel we won't be able to bear them, we won't be able to survive them, often what we do is we try to avoid them. And so it might be turning our mind away and not going there, but it might be using distractions that some can be, and I don't like to be black and white, like positive and negative, but some might not be healthy coping mechanisms. So like you mentioned in the email you got, that lady said she actually just wants to drink as much as possible so that she can just shut off those feelings and shut down and forget. And it does help, but it's like a temporary fix, because the next day she's going to feel worse, as we know, or it's going to perpetuate quite a tricky cycle. So titrate is a word that comes to mind. Is maybe we can't descend completely into total despair and total depression, but we can sit with what's the word? As much as we can tolerate, we can sit in it, feel it. How does my body feel? How does it affect my thoughts? What are the thoughts I'm having? And just sometimes almost like breathe into it or write it down. Sometimes it helps to take it outside of you. So it might be talking to someone about it or writing about it. Some people find moving their body helps, exercising, or something more gentle like yoga, so that we're not totally defending against it. You know, we're also accepting that it's there. Like today I'm feeling depressed. Today I'm feeling really low. Today I don't think I can do such and such. So maybe today I'm going to look after myself in a different way, and then maybe tomorrow I can do it, or something like that, you know?
Sure. What's powerful is using the words look after yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we don't always think of in these situations, because we often get into a place of, when start feeling depressed, is I get into a place of, I'm so terrible, I'm so useless, you know, I've lost my contract because of me. If I'd been good enough, they would have used me somewhere else. You know, all of this dialogue happens in my head.
Yeah.
And then what happens is I don't ever actually stop and say, okay, let me look after myself. And I think that's what's so powerful about your field, and why I recommend therapy so often to people, is that it is about being able to step out of that internal dialogue that you talk about, which is spiraling into it, but stepping into a distraction where you're able to say, this is just almost repack my mind into a way that says, in a way that's manageable. And I think that's the power of therapy. And what I think you're saying is why it's so important that we have these kind of conversations and speak about what we're feeling.
Definitely. And what you're also mentioning, Clive, is, you know, if you get into that way of thinking where you're berating yourself all the time, which is so common, so many of us do that, but we don't always realize we're doing that. You know, we're not always aware of how we speak to ourselves. And would you ever speak to someone else like that? If someone else lost a contract, would you actually say to them, it's your fault, you weren't good enough?
No.
You know, no, but we do it to ourselves. So I think even just having that little bit of awareness where you're almost witnessing how you're thinking. So you're not as identified in a way with the thought. The thought isn't totally overtaking you, and that is how you're feeling, that is you, that is your truth. Almost just realizing, wow, having this thought, these thoughts again. And then you find your way through it. But I am feeling compelled to speak a little bit in general about how I think COVID is affecting our mental state.
Perfect, yeah.
And I'm so glad that you're speaking so openly about it. I think it's really helpful. I think it helps people to realize we're actually all in this boat. You know, no one's immune to it. And I think mild anxiety in all age groups, little children, teenagers, adults, is quite appropriate and is a very normal response during this period. But when our brains are exposed to prolonged anxiety and fear, and if you think about the fears, you know, there's so much unknown, fear of the unknown, fear of contagion, plus social isolation and feeling out of control, it starts to affect our neurochemical balance. And I was speaking to Dr. Shona Fraser, who's a neuroclinical psychologist. And she was saying to me that response in the brain is actually a biological imperative. We have to have that response because it protects us from danger. If you think about how we built, like when the fight or flight response is activated, that extra surge of adrenaline is there to save our lives. We have extra power to run away or to fight. But during this period where there is a chronic, ongoing, perpetual threat of contagion, threat of income, threat of so many things, the neurochemical balance becomes unbalanced, basically. And so, like a whole lot of different things start to happen to us. One of them is we can have very heightened emotional responses. And I was thinking about the interview you did with, is it Carl, the good news guy?
Brent, that was with Brent.
Brent, yes.
Yes.
And he gave the example of the fridge, when his fridge broke down, and it felt like completely the end of the world. And just, I think he even said he had a total meltdown.
Outside
Spa. Yes, outside Spa. And that is such a good example because it's not about the fridge. It's about so many other things happening for us. And when we're going through this, our ability to regulate our emotions through thinking becomes more difficult. And actually thinking our cognitive functioning and our cognitive processes are also affected. So a lot of people are experiencing more difficulty concentrating, learning, remembering things. Our executive skills are compromised. Even our processing speed for information it can be a bit slower. It's like that mental fogginess. I don't know if you've experienced it, but I think everyone I know is experiencing it. And it can really impact on our ability to be as productive as we used to be, like at work. Even for kids, like I think it's so important for schools to be mindful of this, because for schools to expect children to produce what they used to produce and perform at the academic level that they used to perform is not really fair. Wow. They are also finding that it's taking longer to complete tasks, that they can't hold on to information as much. So the schools that have tried to streamline and just prioritize, these are the subjects that are the most critical, and the rest need to do much less or be put on hold for now, are actually, I think, on track. So, and I think that comes back like a bit of a circle to the lists that we were thinking about, like what can I control, what can't I control? And to just hold in mind that to hold ourselves to the same standards as we did before COVID isn't really fair. We might really not be able, some people used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go exercise before a very productive day at work. I'm almost imagining you are one of those people. Yes, okay, yeah. To get up at 5 o'clock right now might feel completely impossible. But if you're still holding yourself to that, it's like we're setting ourselves up for failure. Yeah. And that also creates a negative cycle.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, because the spiral is that I'm not as productive because of the situation I'm in, not realizing that I'm not as productive because of the situation I'm in. Yes. So then I'm beating myself up for being not productive. So I'm in the spiral where eventually I'm feeling all of these negative feelings. Yes. What do? I go and drink a bottle of wine to feel better. Yes. So yes. It is this complete spiral of, actually, if we sit down and say from the very beginning, this is how it is.
Exactly.
And then it's all I can control.
Exactly, Clive. And like, I think of how the standards we held ourselves to prior to this period, almost think of as plan A. Yeah. We want to get back to plan A, but realistically speaking, we really might not be able to, and we're just causing more problems for ourselves if we keep forcing it and pressurizing ourselves and beating ourselves up about it. Yeah. So maybe for now, to think about a plan B. And maybe that means getting up at 7, not at 5. And maybe instead of doing 1 or 2 hours of intense exercise, maybe it's 20 minutes. And maybe my to-do list is going to look a little bit different. Mm. Or maybe I'll need to take more breaks, or, that kind of thing. And just to be a bit more gentle with ourselves. Mm. Yeah.
I'm loving what you're saying. I'm having aha moments going off, because I so relate to it. But I think what you said about children and going back to school, and we're doing this interview just as children are going back. And I think that's so important that people realize that, because you've already got children who are under stress about the fact that you speak about it in the article, that some teenagers don't know if they're going to even be able to finish the year or have to repeat it. And now we're expecting them to perform. So they have this anxiety, they've got this pressure on them to perform. And that internal dialogue they must be having of, I'm not good enough, because perhaps I was a relatively good performer, but now I'm not.
And how out of control they might be feeling. Like, can you even imagine having to write matric this year? And that year, like, you feel your whole future depends on it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you might be aware that the parents that you have or your caregivers maybe have lost their income. Maybe there's so much financial pressure and stress and strain in the home. Maybe there's extra conflict in the home. Maybe, given what we were thinking about in terms of heightened emotional responses, maybe the situation at home is more volatile. They've been sitting, especially teenagers, but also kids of all ages are struggling without peer interaction and having their friends. And I've totally lost my train of thought. but basically, I think sometimes people think kids don't really pick up on what's going on or realize, or that they take it in, and even if they're not telling you verbally, in fact, kids hardly ever tell us verbally. They'll tell us through our behavior and through their behavior. And they might be shutting down more or withdrawing more or acting out. Their behavior might be more difficult, more aggressive, more short-fused, more grumpy, irritable, more needy, and it's hard for parents because they've got to, we're dealing with what we're dealing with, but we've also got to really make space. Yeah, we've got to almost make internal space to be able to think about our children and what they're needing from us, and they take the lead from us. If we're showing them that we're totally stressed out and anxious and paranoid about this, they're going to feel that way. But if we like taking it in our stride and showing we're role modeling more resilience, more adaptability, that would be very helpful for them. We need to support them.
So what you're saying about the heightened emotions, and you mentioned about the grumpiness and all of those things, I'm finding that part of the response to the anxiety has been anger. Yeah. So a lot of people have responded. We've seen it, whether it be towards government, because now there's this feeling you've taken away rights as opposed to protecting me. Jenny, who I interviewed, spoke about her social media rampage with Reader's Warehouse because they hadn't delivered, and she did it because it was a way of expressing her anger. And we spoke about possibly children being in volatile home situations, but I've seen a lot more anger on my social media feed about what the police are doing, what the military are doing. Is anger an appropriate response to anxiety, or is it just a response that happens, and how do we deal with it?
It's hard to answer that generally, like from a blanket response. But I'm thinking a lot about this overwhelming sense of being out of control. And not just out of control, but the people who are the governing forces who are in control, people might feel that there's a lot of unfairness or be very frustrated about what's happening. And I definitely think anger is probably quite rife at the moment. And it's not like you was talking about, is it Jenny who got angry with Reader's Warehouse or something? And like I was saying, it's not about Reader's Warehouse. It's not about the fridge. It's not about, it's about so many things and our own incredible helplessness. Anger can almost also activate us from out of hopelessness, defends us from that hopelessness sometimes. If we succumb to hopelessness, sometimes when we express anger outwardly, we don't get depressed. And sometimes when we turn anger inwards, we can get depressed. So there's something activating about it as well. And also our tolerance is not what it used to be. Like we're sitting almost up here already, and then the smallest thing can just, and then it's more helpful to find concrete things in the world to get angry with and to blame, like the fridge or Reader's Warehouse, or, then otherwise, where do you place it, or what do you do with it? It becomes too difficult. So sometimes just or at a partner or at a colleague, people might be a bit more aggressive at the moment. I think we also have to just hold in mind that everyone's going through weird stuff, very difficult stuff. So a lot of people might be behaving a little bit out of character, or a little bit differently, or a little bit weirdly. And just to remember not to take it personally, and to just hold in mind, actually, I don't know what they're going through, and give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And also, because most of our social interactions at the moment are online, or on text, or on email, it can be very easy to misinterpret tone. I don't know if you found that at all. And because
you read the WhatsApp and what emotional state you're in, as opposed to how the person's intended.
Totally. And I think with COVID, just the nature of it, people tend to be a bit more in a paranoid state. So just try to be a bit mindful of giving people the benefit of the doubt, clarifying with people. And it helps to see someone face to face as well, and speak to them. So you hear their voice, you see their expressions, and you get a better sense of where they're coming from. So
not just made me think of a situation now. So I got a WhatsApp from someone, and they didn't say hi Clive, they just said Clive, and then they went on with what they're doing, and I was like, how dare you? I know my name. You need to at least say hi Clive. But no, I read it completely from this tone of like, I had almost been negated, but you just said my name, you didn't greet me. And it's completely puerile, but it's exactly.
No, it's not. I think people are doing that a lot, and it's worse than usual.
Yeah.
And maybe for us also to hold in mind that when we are communicating with other people, just to try and be friendly, not too short, not, because it can really become misconstrued. Yeah. And then people can spiral, and it's often more than it would have normally been.
And I think we see that on social media, and the interactions that often happen is that people are spiraling in these comments and having social media feuds going on, because it is a place where you can just express that anger, but you're not angry at the real situation.
Not about that, yeah. And I think if need be, if people are finding that social media, for example, is having a bit of a toxic effect on them, or watching the news constantly, or like detox a bit from it. Don't be on it that much. Think about how to look after yourself at the moment, and protect yourself, and what's coming into your psyche.
I think that's so important. We're going back to that phrase, look after yourself. And I think that's, if one person takes that out away from this interview, I think, we've achieved so much, because so much of this time is about fear, anger, there's hostility. I'm looking at what's happening in America at the moment with in Minnesota, is Minnesota. And, there's just so much anger and uncertainty in the world, and it feels also overwhelming. And I think what we need to do is just take a step back and say, am I okay? How am I feeling? And how am I going to make myself a little bit more okay than I am right now? And sorry?
No, keep going.
No, but that's kind of what you say in this article, I think, is as well. And you've given us some practical steps to be able to do that. Is how can I just make myself feel a little bit better than today, than I felt maybe when I woke up this morning. And maybe that's I delete Instagram for a little while, because everyone else looks like they're having a far better life than I am.
But we know it's not true, but yes.
It doesn't matter. That's still how you feel. I see that as well. I see people, kind of, look what I'm doing, and, look down day 50, and there's pictures of them, making banana bread. And I'm like, I just managed to put on my slippers this morning and, and walk to the bathroom.
And that might be a small victory.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not even that much of, sorry?
Celebrate the small victories is what we need to do.
And actually if you haven't been getting out of bed for the last few days, maybe getting out of your bed and putting slippers on is a huge victory.
Yeah.
And there were two things that were coming into my mind when I was hearing what you were saying, is the one thing is also being on lockdown, it's almost like our normal distractions have been taken away from us. So often that like high level state of productivity all the time isn't there. So sometimes we're working, busy. Suddenly, we're not so busy. Suddenly there's more time, there's more, and then you're left with all these things inside you that maybe you didn't even realize were there, or you'd been kind of trying to push away, and now you can't push it away. So there have been a lot of things coming up for people, and it can be an opportunity to process some stuff and work through some stuff. And if people need support to do that, there are lots of people they could contact. But the other thing was around anger, came back to my mind. Sometimes I think often, what is underneath anger? And it can be many things, but I often think, if you really think like, what is underneath that? What is underneath that? It's often fear. It's profound insecurity and fear. And it might be fear and insecurity in my livelihood, in my mortality, in, you know, I mean, it can be that kind of real. So you saying that there's a lot of anger in the world around us, I agree with that. And maybe one of the ways we could understand that is actually there's a lot of fear in the world at the moment.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree, I think. And that's why I want to do these videos, is so we can acknowledge these kind of things. I think there's power in acknowledging where we're at. And through our conversation, I've also started to see a little bit more about where I'm at. And that, I think it's so important that we have these conversations with people. And like you've said, there's organizations and support structures that if you really are struggling with, you know, being in a situation which is making you depressed, it's important to reach out and to get help, you know.
Please reach out, you know, and I know there are services ready and waiting.
Yeah.
We were aware of what's happening for everyone. Please, like I just want to implore people, please don't feel that you're alone and that you have to be alone. There are people who can talk to you on the other side of the phone, on a Zoom therapy space. Hospitals are open. Casualties are open. We're running our services daily, you know?
Oh, it's very important. Daniella, I want to wrap up because I could talk to you for hours. This has been amazing. So thank you. So I want to try and end off positively, and I'm trying to think how do I end off positively after all of this? I mean, because it has been, this isn't light stuff we've been talking about. The reality is that we're sitting in a situation where, and I hate, and I'm going to use it, I hate when people say it's unprecedented. I always want to vomit because I'm so tired of hearing it is unprecedented. But it completely is. I'm navigating a world I've never navigated. I'm navigating a career situation I've never had to navigate. And I think it is so important that we, and even it's one of the things you talk about in the article is that we find virtual friendships, that we make space to connect. And at the moment it's manufactured via Zoom because we can't hug, we can't have a carrot cake and a cappuccino, which I always refer to. But it's important that we realize that there are friendships out there. And even if those friendships are someone who's a stranger on the other side of the line, but it's important to remember that one of the best that I know I've felt better by having these conversations, by making the effort to Zoom my friends. And, you know, I know people who've had Trivial Pursuit evenings via Zoom, and it's stuff we would never normally do, but I think it's so important we make these kind of efforts to understand that we're in a situation where we don't know how to feel. So how am I going to look after myself and create connection, because we're made to be connected.
That's love.
That sums up what we said.
And also I was thinking to add to that, you know, we spoke about in the beginning how it's been phases of lockdown for all of us that we've gone through. And we spoke a lot about anxiety and fear and what can happen. But if I'm thinking about, I suppose, the journey I've been on at work, there was that. And then it moved into a much more, once like I accepted the situation, I could adapt to it. And I've really adapted to it, strangely enough. It's now becoming my, as people say, new normal. And I'm finding that we're moving into a new phase at work, which is so exciting. It's like a generative space where we're having to strategize again and think about, okay, level 3 is coming up. What is that going to mean for us, for our services, for our interventions? And it's so beautiful. It's almost presented the opportunity to put together new programs, to brainstorm together. There's something very creative and exciting coming up. So,
and I think it's so important, but you've touched on another thing that we haven't really spoken about, but it's looking for the opportunity, you know, and it is in any, you know, that there's also this cliche going around that Shakespeare wrote King Lear in lockdown, you know. So, and one of the most studied and hated books by Beatrix, etc. But the reality is that there is opportunity. There is opportunity. My partner Frank keeps saying to me, and everyone who has met me knows that I love to write, but I'm always saying I'm a writer who doesn't write. So he kept saying to me when there was one weekend where I lay in bed practically the entire weekend. I just felt paralyzed. And he was like, go write that book. And I wasn't in the space to do that, but I was like, there is opportunity. I'm sitting, I have more time available, and let's look for those moments of saying, what can I add? As opposed to looking at what we've lost.
Exactly. I love that. And this period is asking something of us, actually. And don't underestimate all those difficult feelings that have come up for everybody. There's a lot of processing that's happening. And because you've gone through that, you might find you feeling a little bit lighter. They've been processed in a different way. They're sitting inside you in a more ordered way, maybe, in an understood way. And it frees up more and more space and energy to then, as you say, start looking at the situation as also possible opportunities to do things. Yeah.
I want to leave it there. So I just want to say thank you so much for the time and for the insight. It's been really helpful for me. There's been practical stuff that I want to take away with me. So I feel, and I really hope that a lot of people get to watch this, because I think you've said some very important stuff. And I really hope that people take it to heart. So thank you for giving up your time to spend with me on your Sunday. And I'm sure I'm taking away from family time, and I know you working, so family time is still special. So thank you so much for being with me on the line and for your insights, Daniella. I really appreciate it.